What is going on, my peeps? I've got some more suspension work to do today. If you didn't see the last video, I put together this set of forks back here. I'll put the link to that video right up here in the corner. Just click that little circle. Alright, so the forks are done, and it would make sense to move on to the shock, right? Well, I really don't want to put the shock together with that ugly yellow spring. I'm not really sure why Honda decided to go with yellow. What I'll end up doing with it is stripping the paint off and powder coating it red. I'm going to get started on this process by stripping off that ugly yellow paint with some paint remover. So I've got some aircraft paint remover that I've had really good luck with over the years. I'll put the link to where you can buy it down in the description. And then a tub to somewhat contain that paint remover and a brush. Definitely a smart idea to wear some gloves for this too. So I'm just going to dump this paint stripper into the tub and start brushing it onto the spring. Alright, got the spring coated pretty well. Just going to let that sit for a good 15 or 20 minutes and let the paint bubble up. The paint is really starting to bubble up now. I'm going to begin by scraping it off, and if need be, I'll apply more stripper. I'll be using a combination of these two brushes to knock off this bubbled off paint. I'm going to try to keep it all contained within this bin. That way I can dispose of it in a responsible way. One thing to really keep in mind as you're doing this is to not let the paint stripper fling from the brush. If it gets in your eyes, that is not going to be good. Alright, I'm going to call that good for round one of the paint stripping. I'm going to dump some more paint stripper into this bin and brush it onto the spring, and it should take care of the rest of this paint. Looks like the majority of the paint has been eaten up by the stripper. It's going to give the spring a wipe down, and then whatever paint is left over, I'm going to knock off with the wire brush. At this point, all the paint is off the spring. Just going to give it a little cleanup to prep for powder coating. So I've just got degreaser here in this bottle. Spray it down, and then give the spring a scrub down with some Scotch-Brite. Since it is bare steel now, definitely going to want to dry it off to prevent it from rusting. As for the leftover paint stripper and the paint that came off the spring, just going to wipe it up with rags and toss it in the garbage. Definitely something you don't want to wash down the drain. One thing I should have mentioned earlier, if you have access to a sandblaster, that is going to work a lot better than stripping the paint off with paint stripper. Unfortunately, I don't have access to a sandblast cabinet, so the paint stripper had to do for now. I'm going to go ahead and show you the setup I have for powder coating right now. Now, it's actually been probably 4 or 5 years since I last powder coated, but luckily I still have the equipment. The only thing I had to pick up was a different oven and then wire it in, hook it up, all that. But I still have the powder coating gun and some powders left over, and hopefully enough talent to actually powder coat still. So for you guys that have been watching the channel for a while, you might remember back in the day over at my parents' house, powder coating rims, hubs, engine covers. It was pretty cool stuff. If you want to see some old school videos, go find those ones. They're pretty good. Here is the same powder coating gun I used many years back. Just an Eastwood cheap little unit, but it sure does work good. This is the control box, obviously a gun with an air hookup. And then over here is the ground. You attach that to the part. And then the little trigger button. And this activates the charge to the part when you push it. And then just the power cord. These are the powders I'll be using on the shock spring. First coat is a chrome base, followed up with a red. This is a transparent red, so the finish is going to be like a candy red or translucent red. And then of course we've got the oven. Just picked this thing up on Craigslist, just your standard oven. Got it preheating right now. And you definitely don't want to use your household oven. I mean, like an oven that you'll actually be cooking in afterwards. All right, enough talking. Let's get to powder coating. So I've got the rack here. Got to find a way to hang the shock spring from the rack. And I wish I had a set of sawhorses, but I'm just gonna have to improvise here and hang it on the ends of the cart. Basically what I'm doing is hanging the spring from the rack, spraying the powder on, and then baking it in the oven. All right, before spraying any powder, you'll need to wipe the part down with something such as acetone. I've got this pre-painting prep, they call it. So it's basically an acetone or mineral spirits. Now with the part all cleaned up, I'm gonna give the spring a preheat through the oven. Basically what this does is it pre-bakes the part and removes any impurities or anything that'll come to the surface, and just preps it for powder coating. Just gives it that extra clean. So I've got these handy little hooks that I'm gonna use to hang the spring from the rack. Just works something like that. All right, now I'm gonna drop it in the oven and let it heat at 350 for about 10 to 15 minutes. While I've got the part preheating, I'm gonna set up the powder coating gun and get powder ready to go. And since this stuff has been sitting around for like 5 years, I should probably blow all the dust off with the air compressor. And since I'm not gonna really use much for this project, I've got a little plastic spoon here. I'm just gonna dump a little into the plastic container that screws onto the gun over here. And in case you guys are wondering where I got my powders from, these two colors are from Prismatic Powders online. Right here, this one is a super chrome, and the red is called Dazzling Red. I'll put the links to their website down in the description. And for the gun as well, I will link it down below too, so you guys can see the whole setup that I'm using. All right, this should be enough powder for this project. It just screws onto the gun like that. And then on this end, obviously an air hookup. And it's pretty much necessary to have a regulator on your gun. That way you can regulate the flow of the powder coming out, and that makes a really big difference. So you pretty much just want a nice slow flow coming out of the gun. And right now I have it around 10 psi. So it doesn't really take a whole lot of pressure to make these powder coating guns work. And once I have this thing plugged in, I'll be all set, ready to go. All right guys, it is time to pull the spring out of the oven and spray it with the first coat. Should probably wear some gloves for this, huh? Might be a little bit warm. While the shock spring is cooling down, I should probably clean up the carts here. That powder gets into everything, and I've been kind of sloppy lately, so good time to pick things up. All right, I'm gonna give the spring one more wipe down before I throw some powder at it. Now it's kind of hard to wipe it down with it hanging from the rack, but I'm just gonna do the best I can right here. So this is the little alligator clip that I showed you earlier. I'm gonna clip this onto the part somewhere and then start dusting down the spring with powder. So right where I'm clipping it here, it doesn't really matter. It's the top of the spring and it won't be visible. So I need a nice solid ground for this powder to stick. And this is the button that activates it. As soon as I push that button, the part will be electrically charged, and the powder coming out of the gun will be attracted to the part and it'll stick like glue. All right, let's give it a shot. See if I remember how to do this. If I remember right, I think what I was doing is laying down the powder in the toughest and the hardest places to get to, doing that part first. So obviously on the spring, that's going to be in between the coils here. So the powder coming out looks like a gray, like a really flat gray. But as soon as it's baked, it is going to be looking pretty much like chrome. Looks like I've got a nice even coat here on the spring. I'm gonna pop off this ground and then toss the spring in the oven for, let's see, the manufacturer recommended 12 minutes at 450 degrees, so that is what I'm gonna go with. All right, let's say goodbye to the shock spring. Wish it luck. I'm like really excited to see how this spring turns out. So instead of opening the oven door like every 5 seconds to look at it, I'm gonna go package up an order that just came through. Let's go check on that spring. What will she look like? Wow, that actually looks really good. For a powder coat chrome, that looks pretty darn close to chrome itself. Now for the tricky part. I'm gonna pull the spring out of the oven, and before it cools down too much, I have to spray on that red powder. Alrighty guys, here's a little better look at the chrome first stage. Spraying the first coat in a translucent color is always the easiest. Now I've got my work cut out for me spraying this red. So with the red or the second coat, it's not going to want to stick if the part is all the way cooled off. So that's why I got to spray it when the part still has some heat left in it. And I believe from when I powder coated before, I would wait until the rack was cooled to the touch and then spray the second coat. How these transparent colors work is you have a chrome base layer, which I've got down right now, and then you throw the color on top of it, and the color is transparent, so you can see through to the chrome base, and that's what gives it that really kind of anodized or candy look to it. And of course, I'm gonna have to switch out the powder for the red. When you switch out the powder, you're gonna have to blow all this powder left in the gun. Alright, the rack is just cool enough to touch now, and that should be the perfect temperature to spray the red at. So I had waited a little bit too long to spray the red, and the part cooled off too much, so it wasn't sticking quite as good as I would hoped. So I might have to do a second coat on this one. And that's why it's so tricky to spray these translucent colors. You have to hit the temperature just right. All right, got the second coat laid down and the spring's back in the oven. Gonna come back in about 12 to 15 minutes and this thing should be fully cured. Man, just the smell of the powder curing brings back so many memories of living at my parents' house and powder coating all this stuff. Building these bikes, it's been way too long since I've powder coated. I'm pretty excited to see how this spring turns out. If everything goes to plan, I'll definitely be doing some more powder coating on this build. Well, the 15 minutes is up. Let's take a look at this thing. Pretty frickin' sweet color if you ask me. I thought for sure I had messed it up when that first coat of red didn't go down very good, but in the end, turned out pretty good. So it's got a little bit of metallic in it, just a hint. Well, the spring turned out prime. Really happy with the final result. As you can imagine, the next video coming up is going to be on putting the shock back together, installing new bushings, new seals, and new oil as well. So keep a lookout for that one. And just a quick reminder, I've only got a couple of these hats left. So head over to primemx.com and check them out. I'll see you guys later.